Welcome back to the Alli from Corporate podcast. If you're interested in learning more about career development, job searching, and growing as the badass professional I know you are, you've come to the right place. So sit back and relax. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Alli from Corporate podcast. I'm your host, Alli, and today we have a very special guest. This podcast is everything career development and job searching. I have guests on all the time, like this wonderful one that we have today that I'll introduce in a minute, who talk about their job search experience, their career journey experience, lessons learned that they want to share with you. So let's get into it. This is Kyle Thomas. Kyle, I'm so excited to have you. Thank you for joining us today. Yes.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Kyle, you live in New York. You are a amazing dad of 3. You help startup job seekers land amazing roles at world-changing startups. Is that right?
Yep. Ambitious career, accelerating roles at world-changing startups is the best way I've been able to describe it.
I love that you put the word ambitious in there, because I truly believe if you are looking to land an amazing role as a job seeker, you need to have the ambition piece. Like, you can't be a lazy job seeker. You're not going to get the roles that you deserve or want. So I love that you have that in there. So tell me a little bit about, I know you're a career coach. Tell me a little bit about your program first and the ways that you help your clients.
Sure. So the program that I've created is essentially everything that I wish that I would have had when I was looking for my startup jobs. So startups are kind of a bit of a black box to some people outside. Even if you're in the industry, sometimes it can be hard to understand what's out there. Salary and equity is challenging quite often, that people don't have a ton of exposure to. So the program that who we help is, like I said, ambitious job seekers looking to accelerate their career through their next role at a startup. Most folks are mid-career and senior level folks, although we do have some young, hungry hustlers, young career folks, and they actually see fantastic results as well. And so we combine a handful of different elements. There's a community element, so everybody's together. My goal in the program and just in general is to eliminate the anxiety, uncertainty, and loneliness of the job search. So the community element definitely tackles that loneliness piece. And then we help people create that really compelling vision of what's the end point, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, and then help them develop the understanding of what are the skills, experience, network, and teachers that are going to accelerate them and make that vision that they have of the future inevitable. Get them really confident in their ability to get there, the results they drive, who they drive them for, and the types of companies that they want to work for going forward. And then work with them to develop a scalable networking technique that will leverage their existing network, really works for cold targeted outreach at the companies and individuals that they want to work with, and how to create value. What does that even mean? How do you create value in order to stand out with people? And then we layer on top of that things like, mock interviews and all that kind of stuff to really make sure that you walk out of the interview process saying, and really like the approach to any company that you really want to work for, saying, there's nothing more I could have done to land that job. And then when it comes to startups, we layer on top of that investor grade tools. So because I have my own company, I'm able to get access to pitch books, so we can pull really detailed targeted company lists. Once you develop that ideal target characteristics for the type of role and the type of company that you want to go after, we can pull lists of hundreds of companies that match that description, that have offices in your location or have offices in the US. And we're also able to pull hyper accurate salary and equity benchmarking based on the function of the role, the seniority of the role, the location of the role, and then a bunch of details about this specific company. So things like the amount of money they've raised, how much the company is worth, the number of employees at the company, the revenue of the company. We can get really granular and specific so that when we help those individuals negotiate their salaries, we're able to maximize that offer and really accelerate them towards, that end payout. And particularly when it comes to startups, the big thing that a lot of people say is they're like, oh, it's so risky. And so we try and de-risk that with the method, and really like making sure that folks structure it in a way so that they're getting those skills, experience, network, and teachers, because you can lose a job, but you can't lose those things. And using those investor grade resources to say, okay, investors say that this company has a 98% chance success of exit. Now, take that with a grain of salt, but at least it gives you a little bit of more confidence that this company's going to be around for a while. And there's other methodologies that we teach in the program to how you suss out the company's longevity and if you want to work there. But that's the basis of the program.
Nice. That sounds so helpful. So you touched on a couple points that I want to bring back. The loneliness of the job search. Last time I job searched, it was so depressing and just like in a vacuum. Like, I love that you have a community aspect, because if somebody is getting auto rejected and getting emails from, let's be honest, robots saying, sorry, you didn't get the role, that could just be so discouraging. But if you have somebody else that you can talk to and say like, hey, are you going through the same thing? And they're like, yeah, I got those emails too, but here's what I tweaked instead. Maybe that'll help you. Like, that is a game changer. So I love that you have a community aspect. Another question I have is, I used to use glassdoor.com and salary.com for salary benchmarking data. Do you use different tools?
Yeah. So I was able to gain access to a tool. The reason why I use the tool that I use now was, so the answer is yes. One of the things, the vision that I have for the program, and just like in general, there's so many things about the job search that are incredibly frustrating that I don't necessarily think need to be that way. And one of the things that frustrated me the most was that you kind of have to go out into these like self-reported data locations and then piece together like what is the 10th percentile, the 20th percentile, the 50th percentile, the 75th percentile, the 90th percentile of each of these different roles in all the different companies, and then trust that the person's giving you accurate data. And it's so frustrating as a job seeker, and you have no idea, like you're at such a disadvantage because these like many companies, there's like free resources for them to use if they plug in their salary information and cap table and things like that. So I use a different resource for that. That's not self-reported
Cool.
in order to get that data.
That's so cool. So that's an
and
exclusive
the rationale behind that, the rationale behind that is access to that tool when I was leaving Uber allowed me to negotiate a $100,000 salary increase. And I would not have asked for that much money had I not known that that's how much people in that role were making. And so this is why it can really work as a disadvantage to the individuals on the job search, because they don't know what people are worth. And oftentimes people are so cagey about their salaries. Luckily, me and my friend group that had left Uber were very open about it. And so I had a relative idea. And then this gave me actionable data that I could take and hand to the startup and say, look, this is what I'm seeing. I don't know if you guys are kind of thinking about it in the same way, but here's kind of the data and what I'm looking for.
Wow. So you worked for Uber, right? You were one of the early employees?
Yeah. So I was employee number 250.
250. Okay, I'm so curious about this, because obviously Uber has grown to be would you call it a unicorn, or was it a unicorn?
Oh yeah. It's like it's at least a decacorn. I don't know what it's called when it gets into, it's a multi-decacorn at this point.
That's
I think.
insane. Okay. So first, can you define what a startup unicorn is? And then I want to hear all about how you got the job at Uber.
Yes. So a startup unicorn is a company. Somebody's going to probably in the comments will
I'll look it
butcher
up.
me
I'll
on
look
this,
it
but
up to fact check
it's
you.
a company that's reached $1 billion in valuation. There's some other factors in there as well. I think that
You're right.
Yeah. So there's a couple other factors in there as well, I think, to qualify it, but it's essentially a company that's reached $1 billion in valuation
Before going public, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Wow, that's insane. Yeah. Okay, so tell me, so you got a job at Uber as one of the early first 250 employees. That's huge. And other people listening and watching might also want to work for a company who they think could get that big, but they're starting early on. So how did you get in early? And why Uber back then? Did you know it was going to be huge?
So it was definitely not purposeful in a sense. I definitely wanted to work for the company. I grew up in Seattle, and Seattle was one of the first markets that Uber launched. And Seattle does not have a very good public transportation system. They have buses, but there's no subways. There wasn't trains at the time. They've gotten significantly better since then. But at the time, we were relying on yellow cabs. I was 20, in my like early to mid 20s. We were going out on the weekends, and you had to call the cab company, and they might show up, they might not. They hassled you about cash, And so when Uber came about and you requested the car, the guy showed up, he's wearing a suit, he opens the door for you, there's cold water. It was just like such a game changer that it was worth the, nominal extra cost, and it wasn't really that much expensive. And my introduction to the company, actually, I first found out about it. One of one of the only members of my high school who had gone to an Ivy League school had gotten a job at Goldman Sachs. He was definitely making like the most money of anybody that I knew out of college. And then on LinkedIn, I see that he quits his job and starts working for a company I'd never heard of. And I was like, what in the world? Like, why would somebody go and, take this job when they have the golden ticket? And that company was Uber. And he lived in New York City at the time. We'd played basketball growing up and knew each other in elementary school. And ultimately what ended up happening, I was working a job I hated in Seattle, and applied to the management trainee program there, was trying to get ahead as much as I could, and was rejected 3 times in 2 years. And then the final time I was rejected, I was like, I don't even want to be here. Why am I doing this? I'm not super interested. It's like pulling teeth to try and get interested in this. So I went on this kind of journey of self-discovery over a year and traveled to Guatemala for 2 weeks. I don't speak any Spanish. Ended up at EDC Vegas at this massive electronic music festival, and ended up meeting a gal that would become my future wife at that festival. She lived in New York City. I lived in Seattle. And so we did long distance for a little while. Eventually I was like, I hate my job here. You just got promoted. I'm going to move over. And so I quit my job, had 3 months of runway saved up, moved to New York City in with her and her 3 roommates, and really like spent the 3 months pounding the pavement. Like didn't really know. I knew that I wanted to do something and I kept a journal the entire time, which is incredibly helpful to look back on. But I knew that I wanted to work in something that I was really excited about and passionate about. So I was reaching out to just like really successful people on LinkedIn, got some conversations there, but wasn't really building traction. I didn't know what I know now and like what we teach in the program, and was about to run out of money. So I took a job at a company where I'd be selling domain names. Wasn't passionate about it, would have been terrible. And while they were running my background check, all the networking that I'd been doing paid off. A gal that I knew in high school was living with the guy that had become one of the first 50 members at Uber, this guy I used to play basketball with. And he shoots me a text and says, hey, heard, Kelsey told me you were looking for work. Would you be interested to come and help us hand out marketing palm cards at the airport taxi lines? And I was like, 100%, I'm in. And he was like, all right, $25. I was like, $1 million to me at the time, $25 an hour. So I went out to the tiny little crappy office in Queens. And, this is one thing for folks that are looking at startup companies. Like it's not all like the sexy stuff. This office was, a dump in a, not so awesome part of Queens. And he filled up a backpack full of these marketing palm cards for me and shot me in an Uber along with another task rabbit out to the LaGuardia airport taxi line. And then for hours, I just like walked up and down selling them on coming back to the office to create an account. Did that for a couple of days, tried to be as helpful as possible around the office, help them like break down iPhones. So at the time, the Uber app was not able to be downloaded. The driver app was not able to be downloaded in the app store. So we had to give iPhones to the drivers. So it was kind of an easy sell when I was walking up and down the taxi lines. I'd say, have you heard of Uber? Give my pitch. And at the end, I'd say, and we'll give you a free iPhone. So, that got people back to the office. But, he brought me back into the office, said, hey, don't go out to the taxi lines today. Help me sign up drivers and teach them and onboard them. So I did that for a couple of days. And by the end of that week, I was like, hey, Andrew, do you have any full-time positions? He said, yeah, 100%. We're looking for another operations manager. Just like shoot me your resume and I'll head it to the recruiter. So I never applied. I went through an analytics exercise that was terrifying. It wasn't, looking back on it, wasn't crazy hard, but like, I hadn't used Excel in so long and things like that. And then the recruiter, and this is what I teach in the program, the recruiter said, the team loves you. You're already doing the job. So she said, the team loves you. You're already doing the job. It's a no-brainer to move you on to the final round. And so I interviewed with the hiring manager.
That's what
so I interviewed with the hiring manager. And that in itself, the interview with the hiring manager was another pretty funny story. But and then I was hired, and it was a dream. I worked there. Like, one of the things that I think I talk about in the program and I teach other people is it really pays to go after companies that you're really excited and interested in. Because if you're not, there was a guy that was also living with us at the time in New York City, and he had other career ambitions. And I said, hey, why don't you come with me? They need extra people. And he said no. And his career is different. Now, he didn't necessarily want the things that I wanted, but, mine, turned into this 7-year journey at one of the fastest growing companies of all time. And it was awesome.
Wow. That is such an incredible story. First, I love how you met your wife. I want to go to EDC someday. I love like electronic and house music. So that's awesome. Wow. So you got that job through networking. Bottom line is networking, being willing to provide value for somebody without anything in return besides $25 an hour, which, let's face it, that's not.
Yeah. And honestly, I would have done it for free.
Yeah,
I would have
probably.
done it for free anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. And you saw your basketball friend leave a huge opportunity to go somewhere that was an unknown, and you were like, he probably knows something that I don't. I'm interested now. So that's so interesting. Okay, so let's talk now about the differences between startups and big companies. So you probably have more startup experience. I have more big company experience. In my experience with interviewing at big companies, it's like an elephant moving through a forest. And I would say a startup is like a mouse running through a forest. The elephant, it's slow moving, it's big, it's hard to it's hard to turn its big body and pivot directions, but a startup is like zoom, 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 zoom. So tell me about startup uh interviewing experience and like company culture in general.
Okay. Startup interviewing experience. Anything specific about startup interviewing experience that to kick off, or just go where
Yes.
I want to go?
So in my so I'll tell you where I'm headed with this question. So in my experience, I've worked for two startups. I got burnt out at both ones and I had to leave. What indicators are there during the interviewing experience that a job seeker can look for so that they can tell what kind of work-life balance they'd have at the startup? Are there red flags that people are like, oh, they look really stressed out, or they were 15 minutes late to this interview, like maybe this isn't the right place for me? What are some red flags for interviewing at a startup for somebody who wants work-life balance?
That's a good question.
Such a specific question. It wasn't supposed to be so
Yeah, no,
specific.
no, 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 no. It's a good question. So, I think one of the things that I suggest people do as they're going through any interview process is to not just reach out to like the hiring manager and the recruiter, but to reach out to people on the team that they're going to work or that they're
Yeah.
like targeting. And oftentimes those individuals will be quite more forthcoming than somebody who's involved in the hiring process or somebody who's on the interview panel. And so you could really ask them, what are things that you wish that you would have known coming in? What are the biggest challenges that you have? What does the way that I like to ask those types of questions is I will frame it from my personal experience, provide both sides of the coin, and then ask them about something with regards to work-life balance. So what that looks like is something along the lines of, look, I've worked in an environment where everything was super cool and calm, and every once in a while there would be kind of these crazy all hands on deck moments where everybody had to jump in, and we would work until midnight and get up at 4 a.m. But really, it was kind of this short period during a crisis scenario. And I've also worked in places where it was all hands on deck all the time until we raised the next round of funding, but it was like months at a time. So just out of curiosity, how often are things all hands on deck? Is that kind of what's always expected? Is that really
Yeah.
just a once in a while thing? And then, of course, they can kind of BS you, but that's the way that I like to frame that. So it's not coming across as, look, I'm not wanting to work hard. It's coming across as like, I'm just trying to gauge to what level is there an all hands on deck mentality, and how often are these midnight runs and late office visits or
Weekends,
working the weekends happening.
working on Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. And some people who are looking for a job and who want to work for a startup are totally cool putting in 60 hours or more. Maybe they don't have a family yet. Maybe they're single. Maybe they live alone and they're like, yeah, I want to put in 120% at a startup and get a big payout. And I want to be dedicated. but some people are looking for more work-life balance. Maybe they have a family, maybe they have hobbies, maybe they're really into traveling and they can't work weekends. Um, so okay, that's interesting. Yeah, startup.
Another on that front, like, you could ask somebody, given that, like, if those are your priorities and things like that, you can ask somebody about their hobbies and how often they get to do them, right? And that's like
That's
it's
smart.
like it's a circuitous way to say, like, what are you super interested in? And then you ask a follow-up of, like, and how often are you able, or do you get to do that? And they may say, like, oh, never, not since I started this job. And then you're like, okay, that's an interesting point.
Okay, no more hiking for me. Yeah, so I teach people it's important to make small talk at the beginning of any interview because that you establish rapport with your interviewer, you show that you're calm, cool and collected, you're confident. So that's a great question to ask. Hey, how was your weekend? What'd you do? If they say I hiked, I visited my mom in another state, I relaxed, I feel great. But if they're like I worked all weekend, then you're like, okay, interesting. Cool. Um, I love this. So, okay, we have one question from people on TikTok. I'm on TikTok live right now. If you're not following me, my handle is at Alli from Corporate Zero. And we have a question for you from somebody. So, how do you talk about the funding aspect in an interview without sounding like you're money hungry? How do you bring up money?
Yeah, so I think that there's different things to be curious about when it comes to funding. And this is why in our program I have access to a software called PitchBook, which is a like investor grade software that gives you all the details about the company's recent fundraising history, who the investors were, how much they fundraised.
Oh,
Oftentimes
cool.
it'll include in there what they've said that the fundraising is going to be used for. And so, doing your research pays off a ton when you're asking that information. So, if you're curious, if the question is more related around how do you ask about funding because you're not 100% certain whether or not this company is going to be around for the next 6 months, then
Right.
what I would say is do your research, go to Crunchbase, go to PitchBook, search the company's name and search for recent funding or search for funding with the company's name. And you should get enough information as to when the last funding round occurred, how much it was. And so if it was like super recently, then you can ask questions about, hey, you just raised X amount of money. From your understanding, depending on the level of seniority that you're applying for, the person may know this or may not, but what are the key priorities that the money is being put towards or something like that.
Smart.
You can also phrase, like, if the question is around burn rate, because like that's something that burn rate is essentially like how much cash is the company burning every month. And it's really important for a lot of these unprofitable startups because essentially it means how much longer can the company survive until it goes under without another round of funding.
Right.
So, and the level of openness that people have with regards to that varies. Oftentimes, you can ask, like, hey, I would, again, similar way of framing the earlier question that we were talking about. I would frame it coming from a point of curiosity and less of a point of like accusation, and I would frame it using data. So you can say something along the lines of, I saw that you guys recently raised, $200 million, but the funding was 2 years ago. Out of curiosity, what's the current burn rate and how much runway does the company have before they need to fund again? And is the company currently fundraising, or do they not need to due to the current profitability of the company? So like, and that will, even like you being able to reference the fact that they raised money and how much they
Makes you
raised
look
and who they
good.
raised it from or whatever, it just like shows that you did your research. So that's the one question. And then based on funding levels, like the salary ranges and things like that, like, it depends. And that's why, I wouldn't know. And so like, that's why I have the software to help me out. But that's the way that I approach those types of funding questions.
Okay, got it. And before we end here, I have one more question for somebody on live. What does Kyle think about unlimited PTO at a startup? That's a hot topic right now. A lot of companies are starting to offer that. It might be a bad thing because then they don't have to pay you when you leave for your unused days, but maybe it's a good thing because you can get every Friday off. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. It, I think it has its pros and its cons. So I'll talk about both from my personal experience. The pros are that you don't really ever have to worry about like, hey, there's this event next Tuesday, you know, is it cool? I did this work. Here's the coverage document. Is it cool if I take it off? And the manager's like, yes, 100%. Or like, you just don't need to worry about like, oh, I'm
Do I
running out of
have enough
days or whatever.
days? Yeah, I hate
Right.
that.
Like that's the best thing. On the flip side, it can work against you in the sense that because you don't have that scarcity, you're less likely to use them. So there's no mandate that you use a specific number of days, and there isn't it's hard to judge as like, is 30 days too much, is 20 days too much, is 15 days too much. And so really it really puts the onus on you as the employee to have an open and honest conversation with your manager and really understand, you have this PTO policy. I just want to kind of put our cards on the table and really understand to what extent can I take advantage of that, or what does that look like, and how can I best prepare you so that I'm able to take the days off that I want. And I really, like, in the early days at Uber, I didn't take, and I know this sounds awful, like I took like one vacation in like the first 4 years, I'll put like an asterisk on that. I can't tell you how many 3-day weekends, 4-day weekends, like, and that was more on me. And so like other people did take advantage of it and took, a week here, a week there. And then like even over the holidays, I'd go home for multiple weeks, and then like I would be working, but like, on and off, it wasn't super serious. So it just provides a lot of flexibility there, but it can be abused because like I said, in the event that the company does not like, you don't have a good manager who is going to be open and honest with you and provide that expectation setting, then it can be really stressful as an employee. So a best practice, I'd say, is make sure that you have a very open and honest conversation with your manager as early in the process as you can after you're hired, in order to set those standards for, look, I'm going to do everything that I can to create a coverage document and make sure that whenever I do take time off, the team is 100% ready and prepared in order to cover anything necessary that I do on a day-to-day basis. And out of curiosity, how many days is too many? How long should I let you know in order to take that vacation time and things like that?
Great answer. Love that. Great. Well, this has been an awesome session talking with you. Again, if you're listening and tuning in for the first time, this is Kyle Thomas. He helps ambitious startup job seekers land career accelerating dream roles at world changing startups. So thank you so much for joining us. I know my listeners, this is going to be on YouTube. It'll be on Apple and Spotify, and then live on TikTok. I know my listeners and viewers have gotten a lot of exciting stuff. We've had over 2,000 people join us on TikTok since we started. So this has been great. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will talk to you later.
See you, Allison.
Bye.